Hello, everyone. Well, it's my great pleasure to have Eric Topol give this last class / webinar, which we opened up because we figured he'd be in popular demand. I think everyone here probably knows Eric, but I'll just give my perspective. I think he's, a guy who's really transforming medicine. He's an MD renegade, so to speak, just thinks very much outside the box. I have to admit, I don't know why he's not at Stanford, but anyway, he just thinks so differently and very futuristically. And I think every time I talk to him, I learn something amazing. So he spearheaded, the whole bringing genomics, which a lot of people did, but I think he took things so much faster, further with the whole digital health era, really revolutionized that. And then even wrote some very popular books around this that were bestsellers. I'm sure some of you know them. One that I remember caught my attention a lot, The Patient Will See You Now. Got a lot of criticism from MDs, so I figured that meant he was spot on. He just nailed it. And I think he really did. And now everything he said in that book and his earlier book as well have all come to fruition. And now he's been talking a lot about, AI and medicine. And I think he had another popular book many of you may have seen. And I think that and other aspects of this will really be the subject of today's talk. And so we really look forward to hearing, his perspective and deep thoughts on this area and where we're going in the future. And he's only going to talk for 35 minutes, which means there's a ton of time for questions. So I hope all of you really stack up your questions, put them in the Q&A. And then we're going to open it up at the end. It'd be fun if you actually ask them rather than me reiterate them. So we have an IT support person who will open up the name. So please do fire away your questions in the chat as Eric goes along. I'm sure you'll have a ton of them. And so, Eric, look forward to hearing what your thoughts are these days.
Oh, thanks. Thanks so much, Michael. It's great to have a chance to join you and really appreciate your kind introduction. Let me go ahead and get my slides up here.
Please.
Let's see, we've got to share these here. And hopefully you got them now. Okay, so the whole idea here is to get into the AI world in medicine. That's kind of the charge here, because getting deep into life science isn't going to be as I think as novel, and perhaps not even a lot of the things I'm going to touch on are not completely new. But let's get right into it. The first thing is that we got some big problems here with diagnostic errors in this country. And there are at least 12 million a year of serious errors. The National Academy of Medicine says that each of us are going to experience one of these in our lifetime. That's not good unless something is done to fix that. If a doctor thinks of the diagnosis in the first 5 minutes, the accuracy is 98%. But after 5 minutes, it drops to 25%. So just remember that about time. Time is really critical. And then the hubris is actually noteworthy. Doctors completely certain of the diagnosis for why someone died were wrong 40% of the time when the autopsy's done. So we got some problems and maybe some remedies. I don't like the term precision medicine, because if you keep making the same mistake over and over again, it's very precise. What we need is accuracy medicine, accurate medicine. And that's what we should be talking about, accurate and precise, but that's a mouthful. So somehow or other, this buzzword of precision medicine keeps being used, and it always gets me a little cuckoo because it isn't really at all a good term. So what we're going to get into today is the way to get the errors down, and then other things, the most far-reaching of which is to restore the patient-doctor relationship. And he's going to rely on these deep neural networks that have really been the mainstay of an AI subtype in the last 6 or 7 years. And instead of brain neurons, this term of artificial neurons in these layers between the inputs that could be image, could be text, could be speech, and percolate through discerning features to get these outputs. And that's really a simulation, perhaps, of our nervous system, but a very rough parallel. But to give you some examples, Here's a chest X-ray shown to an expert radiologist and deemed as normal. And then it's put through the deep neural network that's looked at hundreds of thousands of chest X-rays and picks up the lung nodule that proved to be malignant. So that example is, I think, adds to so many others. This is mammography, which has a notorious problem of false positives and also some false negatives. Here's NYU's, the largest study yet, over 1 million images, with a comparison of 14 radiologists who specialize in mammography. And as you can envision, the deep neural network led to much higher rates of accuracy. And in fact, this now from really nice work from Regina Barzilay, this comparing a mammography neural network, not just working well at one center, but at 3 different health systems around the world, which is, of course, another challenge because sometimes we see these neural networks only clicking at the single venue where they're done. So this has a great opportunity for predicting 5-year risk and clearing up a lot of the problems with mammography. To me, the most powerful way to convey the power of a neural network for discerning things that human eyes can't see is the retina. The retina is fascinating, as we'll get into, but if we show this picture to the international authorities of the retina and ask them if it is from a man or a woman, the chance of them getting it right is 50%. 50%. Whereas a neural network nails it 97% of the time. Now, there are better ways to determine a gender than looking in the retina. That's not the point here. The point is machine eyes, trained, see things we don't even know what they are. In fact, Pierce Keane, who is the leader of AI in ophthalmology at the leading eye institute in the world in the UK, just published a couple of weeks ago this paper where they replicated the 97% accuracy. But what was really interesting, it was done by doctors who never had coded before. That's how easy it is to do this. And also, they still don't know. We have no idea really what the features are that the machine eyes pick up as to knowing what gender it is so accurately. Now, as I mentioned, it's not just gender, that is of little utility, but what is amazing is now we are seeing the retina as a gateway to kidney disease, to the control of diabetes, correlating with hemoglobin A1C, to blood pressure control, to a window into Alzheimer's disease, and predicting the timing and whether it's necessary to intervene for age-related macular degeneration, along with diabetic retinopathy, the 2 leading causes of blindness, both of them potentially preventable. What was striking to me in this paper last month was that by looking at the retina vessels, you can predict the heart calcium score accurately. You don't have to send patients through a CT scan for their calcium score if you just use an algorithm for the eyes, for the retina. Pretty striking. And this is using imagination with neural networks, training data. I mean, it's really like the phenomenal paper that was published in Nature Medicine by Mike Snyder and Duke and colleagues there. That's what you call imagination. And AI really breeds that. Now, I'm not going to get into this, but this is another revolution that's going on in AI and life science. And this is image-free microscopy, identification of rare cells, subcellular, machine vision. This actually, pretty striking, taking fuzzy images and making them crisp. But what is amazing is that now you can look in the retina and you can see the macrophages. And why is that important? I mean, you can actually see live macrophages because of the lack of need anymore for staining. And that is now a way to potentially follow brain inflammation and neurodegenerative diseases. So it turns out it's even more than that. You can follow the hepatobiliary conditions through the eyes, through the retina. Now let's turn to the electrocardiogram. This is, an area that I'm into because I've been reading cardiograms for over 3 decades. I love to read cardiograms. I never would have known you could tell the age of the person or the sex from the cardiogram. Of course, you can't unless you're machine trained, or the ejection fraction, or the hemoglobin, or many different difficult diagnoses like amyloid. And you can make congenital long QT diagnosis just from a fingertip on a sensor, getting a 1 lead ECG that was trained through 1.6 million ECGs from over 500,000 patients with remarkable specificity. This is a condition that is frequently missed and is associated with sudden death. This is one of those rare randomized trials of ECG where Mayo Clinic tested 500 some primary care docs, and half of them had the AI and the other half didn't. And of course, as you would predict, the accuracy helping primary care physicians who are not ECG interpretation experts to become more accurate. It's just not cardiology, ophthalmology, here's pathology. This is striking, and this was a paper, this builds on, I think the very first Path AI paper was from your group, Michael. But this is more recent, actually still now over almost a year old. But the idea is that you could train with 17,000 slides and 10,000 patients, not only picking up the tumor origin, which frequently is in doubt, the structural copy number variants and other structural variants, the driver mutations, and the prognosis from looking at a whole slide image, which is pretty striking and just replicated this month. This is TOAD, the tumor origin assessment algorithm, and it basically showing how efficient it was for picking up the origin primary, which, as I mentioned, can sometimes be difficult. So this is a good paper that just came out a week ago on a review of deep learning of histopathology, and it hasn't yet established clinical utility, and that requires the validation work that still has not been done. And this is a really nice review article if you're interested in this topic, but certainly it's on its way. Dermatology was the classic paper by Andre Esteva, the first major paper really, 2017 in Nature. We wrote further about that in the Lancet, but now, just a few months ago, this has been extended to almost every type of skin lesion, skin cancer that's imaginable. And we'll get to that subsequently, that there is now DermAssist that's being released by Google for free to make that widely available. This extends in every direction. This is thyroid nodules that often are unnecessarily biopsied. And this, I think, is a great study that show how helpful deep learning can be to help make that diagnosis as to whether a biopsy is needed. This is pretty actually striking. Gastroenterologists who would have thought they would lead the charge in AI? But they are using machine vision, particularly in Asia and Japan, to pick up polyps in real time that otherwise would be missed, and in real time to define whether or not they're likely to be cancerous or not, the former being the ones that would deserve a biopsy. And that's finally starting to get into the US. So I'm not going to go through every specialty, every domain of medicine, but I hope I've given you a sense that every walk of life, and that includes pharmacists, paramedics, nurses, will rely on machine eyes as we go forward and support. And Fei-Fei Li there at Stanford has been a pioneer in this field, of course, much bigger than in healthcare, just in AI in general, but in ImageNet. But now the work that she's done with Arnie at your place in this beautiful review article on machine vision in the health system with different types of sensors and the ability to monitor in the operating room, in the ICU to reduce the intensity of nursing support, to prevent falls, to promote better hand washing in the surgical area. All these sorts of things that can be monitored in real time with machine vision. Lots of opportunities there. The other thing, of course, is that this is everywhere along the health span, from embryo selection, which hasn't changed in decades. It's done manually, and it's so inaccurate, all the way through to predicting outcomes when a patient arrives to the hospital. And again, work at Stanford, a spin out. This is subtle medical. They can take MRI images, PET scan images, not only fuzzy images, and use deep learning to make them high resolution, take low Tesla, make it high Tesla, and also very fast. So the less time that people have to spend in the scanner, which is for people with claustrophobia or have better things to do, that's a welcome difference. So the shortage of data exists in the field. There's not many prospective trials. They're all summarized here. They're very minimal compared to the hundreds of retrospective studies, which have issues because they're not replicated in the real world. There's even fewer randomized trials. Most of them have been done in China. And I mentioned the recent one with ECG. Most of them are actually with endoscopy. Fortunately, in this field, the Consort AI and Spirit AI through the University of Birmingham in the UK organized a global Delphi process. And now we have guidelines of what should be for publication, what should be in the protocols for AI in medicine. And this is great because it took 20 years for medical research to have that done. Now we've had it done really in just a few years. And that sets the groundwork for high tier journals for what they're going to need in order to publish, which is really terrific. And of course, for researchers. So this statement, I think, is fair. Antonio D'Oliva, machines will not replace physicians, but physicians using AI will soon replace those not using it. Now, I want to talk about a program which really is the emblematic of AI, and it's the only program I know of its kind. It's a partner of ours in San Diego for our CTSA, Radigenomics. And this is Stephen Kingsmore and his crew. And this involves multiple AI tools to take sick neonates and babies, a sample of blood, to do whole genome sequencing with interpretation and management in now 13 hours. It's pretty impressive. Hundreds of babies have been through this process now, and it's being exported to other health systems around the country. And this is interesting because usually the way it works in medicine is starts with adults and someday gets to kids and babies. This is upending that model. It starts with the babies, and we have yet to see anything like this in adults. So basically what happens, a critically ill baby, infant, the time for prep and sequencing is shown, and the alignment and variant calling through an AI tool. At the same time, fortunately, the chart is relatively thin, but all the lab data, any phenotypic data is all processed through an AI tool. And then there's the automated diagnosis as well as management AI tools. And then what's amazing is here you have ClinThink that's being used to do the natural language processing, including unstructured text in the electronic record. And you've got the either Fabric Genomics or the Invitae for ranking the variants. And then multiple AI tools that have curated all the data for genome to treatment, that is management, so that neonatologists, pediatricians not familiar with rare conditions will be guided as to their best practices, all done through AI, which is pretty astounding, I think. Now, I don't want to just be all positive here. We got issues: privacy, accountability, the security, the XAI, which is the lack of explainability, the fairness and bias. And this is a great review paper from the Berkman Klein Harvard Center, if you haven't seen it. And Ziad Obermeyer and colleagues have done some really nice work about bias, embedded bias, not from the AI, but from the data that goes in. And this is a real problem. This is a great example of a paper from 1952 in white coal miners. And that is the basis for knee osteoarthritis grading today. Well, it turns out that people of color have different symptoms that warrant different management. And it took this paper in Nature Medicine earlier this year to crack the case. And so we know there's lots of problems, but it's the inputs, not so much the algorithms. And we have to be on guard for all data sources as to embedded bias. Now, I want to turn to the patient, because everybody talks about the doctors and the clinicians, but the patients are going to have a big part of the story. People have AI power. That's what we're going to see more and more about ways to give autonomy to support patients. The first one on the block was the Alive Core, which this little scab team of 5 people, half an hour from Apple Mountain View headquarters, or not, Cupertino, I should say. They actually scooped them by a year, but then Apple, when they came out, they said it was theirs. Of course, it's not true. But the idea here is using a deep learning algorithm, know your resting heart rate, individualized, and then when your heart rate is accelerated by a significant amount, it will alert you to do a cardiogram from your wrist, a 1-lead cardiogram that nails the diagnosis of atrial fibrillation. Unfortunately, Apple promotes this to everyone, and only a very small subset of people actually deserve to use it who have risk for atrial fibrillation or have already had it. And so unfortunately, you get a lot of false positives because it's mass marketed, but it is a very important tool in the right patients.
Patients can now do the same urine test at home.
Here's a UTI kit. And I think this is pretty cool, because why would you go to a doctor in a lab to get a high-grade UTI when you can do an auto capture of your own dipstick? You can buy this in other countries now. In the UK, for example, there's 5 of them that are currently in the FDA queue for 510K clearance. So we'll probably start seeing these a lot in the US. Then I mentioned Google and their Skin Derm Assist, which is launched now in Europe and will be launched in the US later this year. It's been validated, but not in diverse populations. It's going to be free, and it helps make various diagnoses. And that's going to empower a lot of people. Going to the doctor for a skin lesion is one of the most rash, is one of the most common reasons for a visit. Diabetic retinopathy was the first prospective trial. 50% of diabetics never have screening for retinopathy. Now you can go to Safeway in many stores around the country, in the supermarket, and an untrained person can have you get a screening through a cloud algorithm that's quite accurate for making the diagnosis. So it doesn't involve any ophthalmologist or doctor. This is people power. It's not, at the moment, it's not done by oneself, but that's where we're headed with smartphones. So that gets me to this virtual medical coach concept, which I'm very enamored by, which is years away. It takes all of your data, all of the relevant medical literature, and every layer of data, including the environment and all your medical data from fetal state on, and is constantly being processed and fed back to provide guidance to prevent an illness that you might otherwise have risk for, or to help manage conditions that you already have manifested. My favorite tool of technology is the smartphone ultrasound. This device, to me, should have already changed medicine in every encounter, but we're a long way from that. The idea that instead of listening to lub-dub, that I can see everything in seconds, every aspect of the heart, is to me still actually amazing. High resolution, equivalent in quality as to a fancy machine that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars used in clinics and hospitals, and even measuring blood flow and valve leakage. But what's interesting in the AI field is now the ability to have an uninitiated person like my 7-year-old grandson being able to do an echocardiogram, just placing the transducer anywhere near the heart and then being guided to move the transducer up or down or clockwise or counterclockwise, and that auto capture, just like you saw with the urine analysis, or just like you have if you deposited your check in the bank. This is now auto labeling, and without even knowing you got a great quality image, it's done. A video loop is done. And then it goes from there to labeling everything, calculating the ejection fraction, doing the interpretation, at least the beginning of that. This is going to keep growing in terms of the interpretation with deep learning algorithms. In fact, I'm so keen on this. The first time I got it out of the box, I decided I'd do a total body medical selfie. It's some variant of the Snyder ohm, I think. But this is a body selfie of every organ from head to toe. And I won't go into every organ for you. I had to look up in Google how to do the gallbladder ultrasound. I've never done that before. It's all there, by the way. It took a matter of minutes. Every part of my body, all the way down to my left foot, was imaged in minutes. High resolution. Anybody can do this. If you have a smartphone, a probe, and you have the internet, you can image any part of your body instead of the brain. And you could have AI eventually guide you as well as provide interpretation. This is going to change. It's not just censored anymore. We're talking about high quality imaging through a smartphone. And that's why we're seeing this inequity reduction, whereby people in the hinterlands of Africa and India and other parts of the world are now having access to technology without training to be able to get the images or interpret them. And Rena Arnault, actually, this was kind of interesting. I saw a post of Mark Zuckerberg, who I guess Chan Zuckerberg supported this work. But it's pretty striking to have all these different congenital heart diseases that are listed here on the left, diagnosed accurately, 18 to 24 weeks of a fetus. So this is pretty impressive work, deep learning to learn all these different diagnoses of complex congenital heart disease. I give Rima a lot of credit for this fine effort. And I have to mention, because this is still pretty striking to me, that when you can take the brain, signals from the brain to make speech direct. So this is brain to speech, no other intermediate, or brain to text, as it was just published in the last week, 10 days ago in Nature. It's pretty impressive how deep learning and convolutional neural networks can make that happen. Now, one thing is, did AI help us in the pandemic? Short answer, no. It didn't do really anything. Maybe one drug was expedited through AI tools of data mining, but that's about it. It's been a big disappointment. But that doesn't mean it won't click in the future. It's just that we've hit it. We had a hyper acceleration of life science during the pandemic, but at the same time, we've had tremendous hype. So like this, will AI save us from coronavirus? The answer, no, it won't. It didn't. Or this is Jeffrey Hinton, the father of deep learning, saying deep learning is going to be able to do everything. Well, it hasn't done that, and it won't do everything. That's the point. So there's too much hype in this field, and I hope I can be kind of balance of the excitement and the potential with the realities. And just to make this point, bring it home, because AI has been a bust for the pandemic largely, that in this paper, they use the term Frankenstein data set. This is about the use of chest x-rays and CT to make the diagnosis of COVID. None of the models, that's over 2,000 papers, none of the models identified are of potential clinical use due to methodologic flaws or underlying biases. And this is supposed to be the most impressive part of what AI did for the pandemic. So I leave you with that point, Frankenstein data set. The last point I want to make is the most far-reaching thing, which I think I've already alluded to. This is the deeper medicine, which is we don't want the robot to see you now. In fact, we have that in some respects now because we are not spending enough time with patients. In this review, I had the great fortune of overseeing a big team at NHS to do a review of NHS with over 50 people, transdisciplinary, over the course of a couple of years. The number one thing that AI was felt to transform is time with the patient. 1 minute liberation from keyboard, 1 minute, each minute had a profound impact. So what we want to do is go from system one thinking of Danny Kahneman's system one, which is reflexive, quick, often wrong, to reflective system two thinking. Right now, we've got fast and shallow medicine. We don't want that. We want deep medicine, and we don't want it to be so fast. We want the gift of time with patients. And that's what we can get by leaning on machines and giving more autonomy to patients with support from their data capture and algorithms. That will get keyboard liberation, synthesizing the patient's data, screening the images ahead of time and all their data, the doctorless stuff that we've talked about, the streamlining of the workflow, and ultimately the virtual medical coach that patients will have if they so choose. Danielle Ofri has been all over this in terms of the inability to think, and her point about the medical errors that I started with, which is that beyond the financial waste, modern medical practice is a petri dish for medical error, patient harm, and physician burnout. So there's not going to be an algorithm for empathy, despite some idea that that's going to happen. It's not going to happen. We're not going to tweak our empathy algorithm. That has to come from clinicians. So over time, hopefully we have come to acknowledge our performance alone is not going to improve. Our intelligence is not going to change in the short term or even the long term. Machines are going to keep getting smarter. They're autodidactic. We're going to be even more imaginative how to use them and train them. We're going to rely on other ways to do that, not just supervised learning and hybrid models in the times ahead. So we need to get more humane and to really capitalize on our unique talent, which is the connection with people. So I just want to leave you with this, this 6-page paper from Francis Peabody, 1927. You know, it was Abraham Verghese, my close friend there, that got me to go back and read this paper. I encourage everyone to read this paper if they're involved in any way as a patient or as a doctor or a nurse. The last sentence of the paper sums it up to 6 pages, but it's worth an inspiration to read the whole thing. One of the essential qualities of the clinician is interest in humanity, for the secret of the care of the patient is in caring for the patient. I just want to acknowledge the great people I get to work with in our institute, which is one of 3 institutes of Scripps research, our funding sources. And I really look forward to your questions and comments. Thanks very much.
All right, great. Well, virtual clap here there, Eric. So the questions are rolling in, and why don't we start with the Q&A, and then I'll certainly capture those in the chat. So place them wherever you like. What we're going to do is basically it's more fun if people ask the questions themselves. So we're going to unmute folks. I'll just go from top to bottom. So starting from the Q&A, Peter, did you want to ask your question, Peter McGuire?
Yes, I just wanted to, first of all, I love the term of accurate medicine versus precision. I thought that was phenomenal. With so many areas in the medical space that you've highlighted that have seen benefit from ML applications, what areas, if any, do you feel are critically underrepresented right now and could benefit from further research?
Oh, I think it's unlimited, Peter. I mean, I don't know of any area that shouldn't be worked over. I mean, it's incredible, actually. This is the biggest rebooting of medicine, I think, in history, because this is, you know, back in the 70s, it was forecasted that computers were going to help medicine, and they didn't. Actually kind of ruined it with electronic health records in some respects. But here's a chance to really do something. So there's really 4 fields that have led the charge here. As I kind of alluded to it. Surprisingly, GI has had a major showing, but ophthalmology, radiology, and to a lesser extent, pathology. We're just starting to scratch the surface, even in those domains, no less all the others. So, you know, I think it's wide open, really.
Great. All right, thanks. Girish, did you want to ask your question?
Oh, sorry, my speaker was not working. Great talk, thanks a lot. I learned so much. So I wanted to ask one thing. I know I agree that AI is great and everything, but when I try to do AI on my own, one thing I quickly realized was the training, the quality of the training data, and also the labels, you know, the labeling of the data. Everyone wants to run AI. Everyone can actually run AI, as you said, like even a doctor who doesn't know AI can run AI. But the problem is, who is going to generate all these data? Who's all these annotations?
Right.
I would like to hear your comment on this.
Yeah, well, that's a really important point, Girish. I mean, I say, firstly, that's the biggest bottleneck right now, because we're relying on supervised learning, and there's only limited data sets that are large and well annotated. We don't have an ImageNet for medicine. We need Fei to bring ImageNet to medicine with a, you know, billion images that are done right. And, you know, it's kind of like that paper that just came out this week, the protein analysis. Well, it's called Fold Up. And they got 1 million citizen scientists to help understand virus and cryptic epitopes. Kind of amazing. It's I mean, a striking ability. We need that. That's kind of, you know, what happened in ImageNet was getting a huge number of people to do labeling and do it right. Now, let's say we never get there, because all we have is the same image sets that keep getting used: chest X-rays, skin lesions, CT scan. They just get used over and over again. They've been beaten to death. So what are we going to do? No one wants to pay money to build these new image sets. So that's forcing the need to go to self-supervised learning. And that's what we're going to see more of. And it remains to be seen how well that's going to work. I mean, there's some initial prospects that it looks pretty encouraging, but I still would love to see resources being put into the classic supervised learning with ground truths and a gazillion images that are really annotated. But you're right, it is a serious bottleneck.
Yeah, maybe also freeing up the data that does exist. It's still,
yeah,
it's often still very, very hard to get to.
That's a big part of it too.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's there, but you just can't seem to get at it for whatever.
Right.
Let's do Thomas, and then I'll move over to the chat. Thomas Beck, did you want to give your question?
Sure. Thank you so much for doing this webinar today, Dr. Topol. So as a medical student, I've had to take courses outside of the curriculum to get exposure to computer science. Since AI is already and will inevitably be incorporated in clinical practice, do you think that will be important for future med students to learn the basics of CS and how it applies to medicine during their training?
Yeah, I had a little problem with the audio, but I think if I got your question right, is what should medical students get some AI experience learning? Is that kind of what it was?
And the basics of CS, I think, as well.
Yeah, yeah. Look, if I could go back, that's a dream. I would be at Stanford as a medical student, and I would be taking courses in computer science, in night classes or whatever. Yeah, that would be the thing to do, because the physicians who have some, understand maybe, the nuances, maybe they don't have to be expert coders and, building the algorithms and validating them, but if they understand, they're going to have such a big edge over the wider physician workforce. So I think what you have there is exciting, because you have some of the best AI talent that exists today in academics at Stanford. So you're really lucky. I would definitely do that if you can.
Well, it's not too late to take those classes, Eric. All right, let's do, I see Fresha has her hand raised, and then I'll move to the chat. Looks like someone else as well. So Fresha, did you want to ask your question? If we can get you unmuted.
Yes, very quick. Awesome talk. Thank you so much. And I love the way that you were unbiased about it. My quick question is that you left us with this, that AI hasn't been helping much about COVID-19. While we have a lot of images from lung, for example, I can understand really what was the issue, because it's not lack of having information. Throughout the data, people have been doing a lot of studies. Why is that?
Yeah, great question. I'm glad you asked that. It goes back to Michael's point in a way. There are all these little studies. There are none with hundreds of thousands of images. And that's why you have overfitting, and you have poor model results, and you have forced, conclusions that are not based on the real data. So this is why that problem existed. If we'd had a true consortium, and the do it right with, nobody's had 100,000 CT scans of COVID in one study and properly done. So that, I think, is the problem. It's kind of like the hydroxychloroquine studies. There were like 100 of them, and they're all small, and most of them were, worthless. And then finally had one large one that finally got the story straight that didn't do anything. But that's what we've had problems with AI, is too many small piecemeal studies.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna do one more from the Angela Zong, and then I'll move to the chat. So don't worry, chat folks, we will get to you. Angela, did you want to ask yours?
Yes. Great talk, Dr. Topol, and thank you so much for all of the work and the body of literature that you've put into AI in medicine, with the review articles and the books that you've written. I just have a really quick question, just out of curiosity. So at the beginning of your talk, you mentioned that currently the medical realm has a lot of problems, such as medical diagnostic errors or just medical errors. I guess, what are the advantages, disadvantages of using AI to resolve those problems versus reinvesting in perhaps medical education to resolve these issues, or adding in like additional healthcare members that might help to offset some of the workload that is contributing to some of these issues?
Right. Well, really good point, Angela. Thanks. We've known about the things you've been asking about for a long time. That is, sleep helps. More staffing helps, all these things that you're alluding to, but the medical error hasn't budged. It hasn't gotten better at all. And particularly the diagnostic errors, where that's the sweet spot for AI right now. So I don't suggest that we shouldn't keep, doing the things you've asked about, but it isn't working. And that's a problem. I mean, the physician workforce is growing, but it is still insufficient to deal with the aged population. And the fact that we have people now with more complex, more comorbidities than ever before, on more drugs than ever before. And we just have a problem with data flooding. And you could throw more people at it, you could just get more sleep at it. It's just, we need something to deconstruct the problems with the data. That's where AI, I think, comes into play.
Great. We're going to move to the chat. Don't worry, I'll try and get back to you if you're on the questions. And there's one more hand up in the participants. Megan, you've had your question there for a while. Megan McKenna, do you want to ask it?
Yeah, hi, I'm in the genetic counseling department. And so of course your little slide on how it could change newborn diagnosis was intriguing to me. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Yeah,
well, speaking of genetic counseling, there's chatbots that do that pretty well too, as you know, which is another type of AI that I think is going to continue to have an impact. Absolutely. But the neonate thing is so striking. You know, I've seen the cases of babies' lives saved or their brains saved because they were in status epilepticus that couldn't be broken by drugs. The problem is, as you know, with sick babies and rare diseases, the chance of every minute is crucial. So to be able to do this in 13 hours, and in every few months it keeps coming down, it'll be less than 10 hours in no time. It's actually amazing to me. And it was basically, it started out when Stephen was in Mercy Hospital in Kansas City, and it was 48 hours, and it didn't have a management tool. And it had erroneous diagnoses sometimes. Now it just keeps getting better because they just keep testing more algorithms. Like the algorithms that I mentioned of those different pieces, they're constantly reassessing and trying new ones and just iterating. It's just it's humming right now. They have, I think, 20 hospitals around the country that are tapped in to this.
Okay. Ryan Ramadan, would you like to ask your question? Ryan.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I can, yeah.
Wow, thank you so much for this talk. This is like one of the most interesting talks I've heard in a really long time. So I had a question regarding a lot of the technologies you talked about in your presentation help, with diagnosis or like early prevention of very difficult diseases to deal with. And then on the other side of things, kind of in the US, we have such high healthcare costs because there's not an emphasis placed on early diagnosis. Rather, like most of the healthcare costs go to late stage treatment. And so I'm curious how you see these technologies playing a role in that in the US, especially interacting with the healthcare payers, which can be kind of resistant to change.
Well, the healthcare payers love changes when it lowers costs. So if you have an algorithm that does a work and does it accurately, and it supplants the physician time, it'll be pretty popular. The problem is that a lot of clinicians have the wrong idea that they're threatened, and when in fact, this is a blessing. I mean, it can actually make their life a lot easier, and it can get back the time with patients with actually looking at them in the eye rather than on a keyboard with their back turned to the patient. So no, I think the payers, a lot of this is yet to be resolved, obviously, because it's still very early. I can't emphasize this enough. Very early in the AI era in medicine. But if you have a colonoscopy, and you're probably young, you never had a colonoscopy, or you go through the prep of that, and then you go and have it done, and they miss the polyps that are cancerous, that are only picked up 5 years later when you're got metastatic cancer, that wouldn't be good. So if you're in a payer, you'd rather have them pay for the machine vision to help because you want to have accurate diagnoses. And then the gastroenterologist can even do more scopes during the day. And that's something we have to be wary about because what we want is to have more time with patients and less of this kind of factory medicine approach. So overall, I think you see a lot of enthusiasm with the payers, but it's still early and we'll have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, demonstrating utility, I guess, is a big
Yeah,
part.
that's the critical point, Michael. Yeah, absolutely.
So Tao, would you like to ask your question? Tao Wang.
Yes, a very impressive presentation. So I'm particularly interested in the smartphone scanner.
Yeah.
That you showed in the presentation. So so how accurate, how accurate the resolution is? Are they sufficient in diagnosis or anything?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked that, Tal. So every patient I see in clinic, I do a smartphone echo. I don't do a total body selfie because I'm functioning in the clinic as a cardiologist. I've been doing that for 10 years. I have never had to pull out a stethoscope.
Mhm.
The images we've published, multiple papers, they're as good. They're in parity now with the conventional ultrasound and echo machines that are used, that are very expensive. They range up to $500,000. It's actually amazing to me. This is one of the marvels. The biggest triumph of medicine ever was, COVID vaccines, right? This is like a few notches below. This is pretty big stuff. Yeah, the images are amazing. The point about accuracy is not about image acquisition. It's about interpretation. And, the algorithms are not built that well yet. Well, I have to say that complex congenital heart disease, if you could do it for that, the rest of it's a walk in the park. So, I think it's impressive, but the accuracy is not the AI at the moment. It's still human eyes that are largely responsible for the image. The main point you're getting at is the quality image resolution. It's very good. Yeah. And by the way, every year I have fellows that I work with, and they start with not even know how to do an echo. And within weeks, they become experts with their smartphone, and they love it. They can never practice cardiology without a smartphone echo. But what's interesting is they're one of less than 1% of cardiologists that are training today that are doing this stuff. Because why? Because you can't bill for it, which is pathetic. Because the same time it takes to pull your stethoscope out and listen to lub dub, you're seeing everything and you're sharing it with the patient, which the ultrasonographer can't do that. They get fired if they said anything. So here you are, you're actually interpreting it and sharing it with the patient in real time. And that's part of that bonding experience.
Hey, great. Tejas, did you want to ask your question? Tejas Mishra.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
So I was thinking of wearables-based detection, and you talked about that the positive predictive value can be lowered where you have rare diseases like long QT, even if you have a method that has very high sensitivity and specificity. Do you think that in the future, wearables-based detection using AI, the specificity is going to improve to 99.999%? Or should we sort of figure out, as you said, who should be using these algorithms or even recording these EKGs to keep the positive predictive value high and then not overwhelm patients with false positives?
Yeah, no, it's a critical point. I don't believe we'll ever get to this 99.99 whatever unless you start to have the right people using the right tools, because it's all about priors and Bayesian, and you can't make things work so well in everyone. The pretest probability is a story here. So we're forcing, I think the Apple Watch thing has been very instructive. There's, I don't know, tens of millions of people that have Apple Watches. All of them now have the AFib detector in them. And, this has been great for cardiologists because they get false alarms and they go see a doctor or a cardiologist. So it's ridiculous. But we're never going to get people who are 20 years old and perfectly healthy, who happen to have a fast heart rate for one reason or another and get an alert that they may have atrial fib. I don't see how you can tweak the algorithm that much to have it be so incredibly accurate in people with no pretest probability. So that, I think, has to remain as the model of, you know, the AI tools are powerful and they can be highly accurate, but they have to be in the right people.
Yeah, may need other kinds of measurements, I suppose, too.
Yeah, yeah. You could get orthogonal measurements, and that will help. That will help. But you know, even if you put together multiple layers of data and it's the wrong person, you're probably going to have a gap of high accuracy.
All right, let's see. I'm switching over the Q&A. Next one is anonymous attendee. So that might have to be me asking this one, Eric. What are the biggest factors holding AI in medicine back? Is it privacy concerns? The difficulty making data sets from images or data from different imaging centers or hospitals? What do you think is holding AI in medicine back?
Well, there are a lot of things, but I think we touched on one big one, which is the bottleneck of data and images, you know, annotated large data set. There is generally a major resistance from the clinical community. Rather than welcoming and embracing the potential, it's like, oh no. You know, so at Stanford, you have the imaging, AI imaging center, which is a standout, but that is the unusual situation. Okay. If you go to most academic centers, there's none of that stuff. And then if you go to community hospitals, oh, forget the AI, you know. So we don't have a lot of willingness to change. It's seen as a threat. It's seen as a threat for reimbursement. I have to say, one of the problems we have is a precursor of the electronic health record. That's been destructive. So anything that's digital that has something to do with a computer is like an anaphylactic reaction. So we have problems, you know, it isn't one thing. There's resistance. There's
is privacy an issue though? Is that was one of the things they mentioned? Do you think that's holding things back?
I think that's more on the patient side, which is an important part, as I tried to emphasize. Yes, for sure. But I think on the clinician side, you know, I don't think that really comes up as a big issue. I mean, security of data, yes, but privacy, maybe not so much. But it isn't one you know, single thing. It's a really several.
Need a whole cultural change amongst other things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Exactly.
So Bing Ching, I hope you're still okay, Eric, time-wise. Can we take 2 more questions?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
That's great. All right. Bing Ching, did you want to ask yours?
Yeah. Thank you, Eric, for the great talk. So my question is that it seems to me that the current AI approaches seem to be more of like matching our best known knowledge. So how would you envision AI's role in advancing or pushing forward medical research? Thank you.
Let's see, I don't know if I got that. Can you help clarify the question? I'm not sure.
So how do you envision AI's role in advancing or pushing the medical research forward?
From the
because it seems
side,
like
go ahead. Yeah.
Now it seems like the current approaches are trying to match what like the best scenario we know to get the most accurate like diagnosis to our knowledge at the moment.
Okay, well, let me see if I start on that. First, I didn't bring this point up, but it's worth highlighting. Most of the studies I did say are retrospective, but almost all are pitting machines versus humans, which is pretty dumb. It kind of goes, it's an outgrowth of, you know, Gary Kasparov and the chess match, you know. But we don't, in medicine, that's not the way it's going to be. It's going to be man plus machine versus machine. So one way we could do better research is to understand the synergies. That is very rarely delved into. So, you know, in the real world, you're not going to have an important diagnosis by a machine only. You're going to have human oversight. But we don't simulate that in the research that's being done. So that's just one way we could make it better. But no, I think our biggest problem is, this goes back to the earlier question, we don't have enough prospective studies. We don't have hardly any randomized studies. I mean, the things that we need for the medical community to ice it, to say, this is the future. We're going to do this stuff. We don't have it. We also have another problem with the FDA. They'll approve anything for this. They give a 510K clearance, and the algorithms are all proprietary. So the medical community never sees them. And so there's another layer of unexplainable AI. And it's explainable, but it's not transparent. And that's an issue. And doctors can say, if I can't see how, the data, I don't want to use it. And so these are things we could do in the future, is make everything more transparent. And obviously, if we can, use the AI to deconstruct the neural network to understand the features that drive its accuracy.
Okay. Great. Jacob Edelson, did you want to ask yours?
Sure. I had a question about sort of liability concerns with kind of black box. Oh, thanks for the lecture. It was fantastic. My question is sort of like how difficult is it to really kind of get clinicians to really kind of trust black box AI models if they can't really be explained, and sort of like what the challenges in that space?
Yeah, there's a couple of parts to that. One is, if you sit down with doctors and ask them about things they do commonly that are unexplained, it's a wake-up call that a lot of things that we do in medicine, we have no idea how they work. So why do we hold algorithms to a higher standard if they've been fully validated? And then on the other hand, there should be efforts to try to explain, yes. And there will be. We're already starting to see that you can go basically reverse engineer the neural network to understand, what it is that drives the accuracy of interpretation. So I think both these things have to come into the fold as to how we go forward. We can't demand everything be explainable if it has incredible validation. But on the other hand, we should endeavor to try.
And maybe I'll just want to expand on one comment you made, with the retinal scans and things. You think a lot of those, I think a lot of stuff will become home tests, as you point out. But some of the bigger equipment that's more expensive, I could see getting set up, like you said, at Safeway or CVS. Are they going to become the new doctor's offices of the future, perhaps?
Yeah, I think you're nailed that one. When it's fairly expensive equipment and it's not on your smartphone or some cheap sensor, it's going to require, something that you can access, whether it be a drugstore, a grocery store. Yes, I think they're going to become more part of the key network. Yeah, definitely.
Something where it's really still accessible, though. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay, well, if you're willing to do it, there's one more question that's popped up here. Let's see, from Tejas again. Tejas, did you want to ask what will be the last question?
Okay.
Hi, thank you. Eric, that was such a great talk. As you were talking, I had this question come in mind. What does sort of the Jetsons future of AI in medicine look like? I.e., if you were to imagine a futuristic world, 20, 50 years from now, what would that look like? What are ways of doing medicine we can't even imagine right now that you might predict? And this is just a sort of fun question, I think.
Yeah, no, it is a fun question. First of all, how do you know about the Jetsons? You're too young for that. I can't see you, but I just have to imagine that the Jetsons are that's like me, old dogs, No, the future, I think the future is a little hard to predict in this case because you have to use your imagination. I mean, it's just, this is so big that people, when I start to see, like I said, get the calcium score of the heart from the retina, say, whoa, just get the lab tests from the wrist, your work that you just published. I mean, so the future is, it's like hard to really know. All I can say is hospitals are threatened. Why would you be in a hospital room when you could be in your own home or even, at work getting monitored, whatever? Why do we have hospitals except for, we're not going to get rid of ICUs and operating rooms, emergency rooms, but the rest of the hospital in that time frame that you're asking about, I think is going to be obsolete. And then, you know, I do think the virtual medical coach in the next 10 years, not 20, I hope, is going to be the reality. And we're going to prevent, you know, prevention has been a dream, never been actualized, never. But we actually now with polygenic risk scores and, you know, all sorts of other means, we're going to know the risk of people for various conditions, and we'll be able to, with coaching, so that the person who's destined to have asthma never has a wheeze in their life and that kind of thing, because we can do this stuff. So if you ask me what is the biggest thing besides deleting hospital rooms from the future, it would be preventing illnesses. That I think is going to be possible.
Great. Normally that would be a good last one, but there's been a plea for one more question, Eric. Can you handle it? It's also
Sure.
Jake and Jacob again. I have no idea what he's going to ask.
Well, they're all good questions. So
fire away, Jacob.
Oh, I guess my question was like kind of similar, but sort of what do you think the future, like what sort of fields are really promising for grad students now to kind of explore that'll be beneficial, be it deep learning or just sort of general machine learning? Are there any sort of...
I mean, there's a lot of areas that are just now getting going, like, you know, the text, you know, everything I've talked about largely was image substrate, but unstructured text is going to be, you know, big. And it's going to turn in the next couple of years. It's just starting to now. So if you want to get into a, you know, an area that is going to be important, because a lot in the medical sphere, that's the other thing I didn't get into, which is on the life science side. I mean, so many different things going on there in genomics, all the different omics. Michael knows well, in protein folding and microscopy, and, you know, basically imaging of cells and, you know, subcellular. I mean, it's so there's just unlimited. On the medical side, you just, if you threw a dart in a dartboard and every different thing of medicine was in the dartboard, you couldn't miss. Wherever the dart lands, it's good.
Sometimes precise too.
Yeah, right. That's a good way to close the circle. Yeah, I like it.
Anyway, I think we pummeled Eric enough. That was a lot, great questions, nice blue sky endings here. So thanks so much, Eric. We really do appreciate it. Really fun stuff. And thank you all for asking these amazing questions. We are going to post the recording. I assume that's still fine with you, Eric. We'll
Sure.
put it up probably on YouTube. We'll put a link on the Innovation Lab website. So I posted something in the chat. I hope you can see it. And otherwise, just reach out to me or I will steer you to Eric's talk. So once again, thank you. And everyone, lots to think about. I know I'm going to go get a calcium retinal scan as soon as possible.
I got to watch out for you because you get all this stuff. Yeah, I know.
I'm working on it with all my devices.
I know.
Learned about a new one today. So, all right, very
Great
good.
to be with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Bye, all.